What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm the Croc Neck, and I am back with yet another collection update. There's been a ton of these here lately, and again, I will eventually get on to like some other solo stuff, but I am making some headway in terms of like catching up to all the shit I bought. So once again, got an interesting batch for you. I got some like random pickups, some newer releases that I just didn't get a chance to do a full-on review for, and you know, some more fun that I had distro diving. Those distros will be the death of me, or like the death of my wallet. Anyway, once again, bunch of stuff, and we're gonna get right down to it. Wretched Inferno, Decaying, Butchery. This is the debut album from this Massachusetts-based death metal act. I believe they started off as a thrash metal act and then kind of morphed into, well, I mean, like some pretty thrashy death metal. Honestly, a lot of this stuff really reminded me a lot of like Exhumed and Blood Freak. Like it's kind of grindy at times, but it has its like more brutal death metal elements, but there's like a ton of thrash metal on here. For the most part, I'd say it's like very fast paced, though you do get some like groovier, more brutal numbers like Crawling from Flesh. I really like the vocal flips on that one in particular. It does kind of an Exhumed thing there where you get like almost those like Ross Sewage style like deep gurgles and like the Matt Harvey like screams on there. The more brutal death metal leaning songs I think are, you know, pretty exceptional too. Sutured Monstrosity, which actually features some guest vocals from the main guy behind Visceral Mass, which is a project I went over like years ago in a collection update. And as far as I know, I don't think they're around anymore, but they put out like one really solid demo / EP. Anyway, they got like some extra gnarly vocals in there. The title track is exceptionally brutal as hell too. And while there's not like a lot of lead work on here per se, there's some like cool tapping harmonies that showed up on, what was it? Writhing Fetal Remains. Some pretty nice song titles here. And I do like the thrashier hooks on the bonus track on here, Planetary Suicide, which sounds like there's like a brief tribute to Metallica's Metal Militia on there. Like there's just like, you know, something about that riff that just seems very familiar. I will say though that this is kind of hampered by a few issues, like namely the production. The production, I like raw sounding death metal, but this is exceptionally muddy, especially when it comes down to the bass. Like the bass is just pure mud, and I don't necessarily like the sound of the drums on here. Like they just sound a little too raw. It has like a live quality to it, but it's like, you know, one of those like live rips where someone recorded it from their phone. You know, maybe like a little bit better than that, but you kind of get like the general gist of it. The other thing that makes it sound live is it's occasionally like a little on the sloppy side, like, you know, nothing to ruin it, but you can definitely tell like there's some moments in there where they just feel like they didn't land a transition as well. Still, overall, I thought this was a pretty gnarly debut album. I would definitely check out more by him if you're a big fan of Exhumed, Blood Freak, God, I would say like Lord Gore too, and definitely some early Carcass as well, of course. Check this out, pretty solid stuff. Black Hole Deity, Profane Geometry. This is the debut full-length from this Alabama-based death metal act. You could probably make some arguments for technical death metal too. I went over their actual first EP, Layer of the Zenith, in a review forever ago. The band really appreciated it, and I definitely wanted to go over this just because I've become like friends with at least, I think, one of the members. It's the guitarist, the bassist, I can't remember, I'm sorry. But I wanted to go over this one in a full-on review. We just didn't have time because the influx of releases this year has just been insane. I know I probably say that every year, but it's like true every year. Either way, I was stoked to go over this because the EP was awesome, and this is even better, honestly. This is tight, vicious, brutal, but again, like very technical, like lots of angular riffs, lots of syncopated chugs. Mike Heller is on drums on here, and if you know his background in terms of just drumming for a ton of awesome bands, that dude is an absolute monster. And his drum work in here is absolutely savage. This album is just brutal, fast, lots of sci-fi themes that kind of give it like its own interesting atmosphere. Like this kind of feels like early Meshuggah at points, but also like Gorguts, Hate Eternal, even Nile. While it is very technical, it's also just super riffy. Like this is more technical in the sense of like Nile, where you just get like these frequent riff changes and again, that heavy syncopation. Lots of interplay between the guitars, lots of like cool dissonant interplay to create these like more dense melodies. Even the vocals feel like they're dense and layered and kind of have almost like a robotic quality to it that really lends itself to the music. And as the album went on, there's definitely like more riff work, like variety that kind of opens up like the title track, machine gun thrashy riffs, like very similar to Deicide. While this album moves at like Mach 10 for most of it, Human Fillet settles down into this absolutely savage breakdown at the end of the song. Cybernetic Inferno is definitely a more like technical song, but it's technical in terms of like, I would say like more of the angular riffs kind of show up, and there's like this weird like kind of atheist-ish sort of vibe to it. The interplay with the guitars in there, it almost kind of gives it like this weird like circus music sort of vibe. Like it feels like, I don't know, like oddly unsettling in a way. Spell of Hecate even has like some more black metal material on there. Like it kind of sounds like werewolves. Like you have like intense blasting, but the riffs are more icy cold and just kind of dark sounding. This whole album is pretty damn awesome, which again compounds my issue of making a year-end list because there's been a lot of quality death metal this year. This is just tight, vicious. The album really doesn't run that long. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and it doesn't feel like you're being like too constantly bombarded by just insane technical play. Like this is just insanely riffy as hell. If you're a big fan of, I would say again, like early Meshuggah, especially like Destroy, Erase, Improve, especially on certain tracks, like actually the last track, Demons Beneath, there's like some big Meshuggah vibes on there. Also Decapitated, I would definitely say like Nile too, of course, and again, like even like a little bit of Atheist here and there. If any of that sounds good, check this out. Killer debut, guys. Coffin Curse, The Continuous Nothing. There's so many Coffin bands, they are hard to keep straight, but this is one that I was really excited for because I went over their last album, Cease to Be, and that was close to becoming a year-end one for me, but I think I listened to it like a year after it came out. I don't know, that was so long ago, I kind of forgot when it came out, but I come back to that album quite often. This is a Chilean death metal act, and, well, I mean, that's generally enough for me right there because Chile just has an amazing death metal scene. And this is definitely another killer band in that scene. Really does not waste any time getting down to just everything. There's a turnover and go in terms of the opening track, Thin the Herd. And this album feels like a little bit more like sinister and evil. Like there's just like a touch more atmosphere. And I would say there's like a little bit more like black metal that kind of like pops up in here to give it like some extra atmosphere. The opening track, Thin the Herd, primitive doctrines crushed and mauled by unseen atrocities. It just feels evil and sinister at all times, but also just feels brutal and pummeling. The drum work on here is just absolutely insane, and I love the vocals. The vocals are often doubled, but the roar itself, it kind of reminds me a lot of Ross Dolan, like his just huge roar delivery and immolation. But it's like Ross Dolan fronting Deicide, which, I don't know, that kind of sounds kind of cool on paper. Because the album is just fast and furious. Like towards the end, it definitely gets a little bit more atmospheric and kind of, you know, opens it up and, you know, lays in a little bit more groove, but like this is just like brutal, right to the throat sort of death metal. Generally, this is a very fast-paced album, but there's lots of cool groovy pockets. Like Primitive Doctrines Crushed, there's a whole section in there where they settle in this groove and you can kind of hear all the hi-hat work. It kind of sounds like they like had a guest spot from a Rattlesnake on there. The last two tracks in particular do kind of slow down the pace a little bit. Among the Suffering Souls and The Dead's Deafening Silence, those are a little bit more atmospheric, a little bit more like incantation vibes, so they kind of slow down to those almost Death Doom breakdowns, and it's not just like a cacophony of just brutal machine gun riffs. Especially on the Dead's Deafening Silence, that song, as it gets more towards its like Death Doom breakdowns, there's the clean melodies that kind of pop up on top. They're very atonal and just, I don't know, like it just creates an atmosphere of pure dread. Kind of reminded me a little bit of Disembowelment, though not quite to their level because few things I think ever hit that level. But that song makes good use of its entire 9-minute runtime. It's just an absolutely massive closer. And this one, again, like a little bit different than the last one. The last one, I felt like it was more like almost like Bloodbath Worship, though they didn't quite have that full-on HM2 tone. This feels like there's like a little bit more variety on it, and I kind of like the more like, you know, blackened, almost like kind of Death Doomy atmosphere in here at times. It kind of gives the album like a little bit more variety overall. Like it's not just, again, like a constant battering of riffs, which don't get me wrong, I rarely ever complain about that. But yeah, this is a really solid album. If you're a big fan, again, of, I mean, I would say like Incantation Immolation, Deicide, but again, like, I don't know, like some more like blackened death metal acts too. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now. I'm kind of drawing a blank, but yeah, just check this out. This is a savage album. Gatecreeper. This is their self-titled EP plus their split appearances as a compilation came out in 2016. I honestly don't own much of their stuff before Sonar and Deprivation. I do have their 4-way split between Homewrecker, Scorched, and Hour to Heaven, but that's it. Like, in terms of like their earlier stuff, I've never had a chance to sit down and listen to their early EP. And yeah, for those that don't know, Arizona-based death metal band, big on that HM two-tone. We all pretty much know how I feel about that. And their new album kind of took a turn into more like melodic death metal territory, though I think they did it really well. This is back when they were just even more raw. Like, a lot of the songs in here are very short, especially on the self-titled EP. They just kind of go for the throat, hang on to like big fat grooves, still a ton of hardcore influence. And while you don't get like the sense of dynamics that you get in their later work, they are just absolutely vicious songs packed with just headbangable groove after headbangable groove. Force Fed and Overdose in particular are like big standouts to me. Like, just the absolutely savage grooves on there are nasty. And I like the more raw production. Like, this is definitely more akin to what they sounded like on Sonar and Deprivation. Their production has cleaned up a bit, though I still think it sounds pretty snarly. And again, HM two-tone, I absolutely love it. Now, Carved in the Stone was the one that I have from the Homewrecker, Outer Heaven, Scorched split. So the other ones are unfamiliar to me. And honestly, the one that really stood out to me was they did a cover of Pentagram, All Your Sins. And I really dig it. Like, granted, it is definitely done in their style. Like, you would not recognize this as a Pentagram song if you had not actually like listened to like what Pentagram actually sounds like. They do it very much in that straight up like hardcore meets, you know, Swedish death metal sound, but they make it like just a touch more swampy sounding. Like, the bass just has like a little bit more sizzle to it. The guitars, they kind of like pulled back a little bit on the crunch and kind of just muddied them up enough to kind of give it like a slightly more doomy tone, and it flat out works. Like, the song is just absolutely devastating. Definitely not a traditional take on the song, at least for the most part, but I don't know, I really dig what they did. And honestly, yeah, this whole little comp here is pretty damn awesome. Like, it only runs like, what, maybe 16, 17 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, but I dug all of it. So yeah, if you're a fan of, again, you know, Entombed and Dismembered and Bloodbath and all that stuff, but also like Creeping Death and 200 Stab Wounds and stuff like that as well, check this out. Pretty solid comp right here. Intolerance, Waking Nightmares of an Endless Void. This is the second album from this Spanish death metal act. I have been a fan of this band since their debut EP, Laments from the Dripstone Cave. They have really interesting album titles. I really enjoyed their first full-length, Dark Paths of Humanity. That was actually close to being a year-ender for me. Just solid, old-school death metal. And this is definitely more of the same, but I feel like this band is, you know, kind of changing around their sound a little bit, namely on production. The production on their earlier material definitely screamed like, you know, just like more raw, old school production. Like, it was deliberately a little bit muddy, though I'd still say mixed well. They were definitely going for that flat out old school death metal sound in terms of production, like, you know, Autopsy, I would say, like Broken Hope. This one is a little bit cleaner, like not polished or poppy or anything like that, but they scraped a layer of mud off the production. And honestly, it kind of works because you can really hear how badass these riffs are in this one. Not that you really couldn't entirely make them out on previous ones, but they come out like really thunderous and really clear on here. This album, and I would say like so far with this band, they just love everything old school. Like, there are tons of like sinister grooves with, you know, killer guitar harmonies that just absolutely reek of like leprosy. I'm never going to have a problem with that. If something reminds me of leprosy, all right, more specifically, if death metal reminds me of leprosy, if a person reminds me of leprosy, then I'm sorry. Hopefully it's not leprosy. But the riffs on here just have that classic sound. It's very meat potatoes, but there's still like a lot of flash to like the harmonies and some of the transitions. Lots of like punky D beats on here. Like, this is just flat out like old school death metal that's really not trying to hide its influences. You get some touches of atmosphere to kind of open it up a little bit. And I will say it's like a little bit more like sci-fi-ish rather than horror. but I don't know, it kind of works. The last track, Melting Skies, does kind of, slow it down. It gets a little bit more doom laden. There's a really cool fade out towards the end into like some haunting ambience. Feels, again, like sinister and dark and menacing and all that. But again, most of this is built on just, again, killer old school death metal riffs. Not super flashy, but they have character. They are hooky. They just kind of remind you of all the bands that you've loved before this. And unless your tastes in death metal have drastically changed, you're probably going to like this too, because it'll remind you of all the killer old school death metal you probably already listened to. So yeah, if you're a big fan of Death, Autopsy, definitely some Morbid Angel too, like a lot of just classic 90s stuff and even like late 80s stuff, check this out. Another killer album from these guys. Krypticy The Non-Return. This is the second full length from this Spanish death metal act. Bit of a theme here. Spain's apparently got like a bunch of killer death metal. This is one I kind of bought on a whim, pretty much in the same batch that I bought Intolerance in. I jammed a couple of tracks. I ended up digging their sound, which is, again, like more flat out old school death metal, though I would say like this one's a little bit more focus on like thrashy intensity. Like I got a lot of Vader vibes on here, especially in the vocals, but also in like the fast pace of it, like the tons of just thrashy machine gun riffs in here. But again, like kind of the mixed up variety, like you have like decidedly more brutal moments on here. You have some more atmospheric moments. You have a lot of really interesting song titles on here. Two that really stood out to me were these songs, Ugh, which it's just UGH and an exclamation point, and actually features a barf take at the end, which was fun. But the song's kind of groovy and, a little bit on the thrashy side. Good riffy hooks over here, and the beefy production here is just great. And then the last track, which I just have some questions about the song title. Like maybe something was lost in translation here. The last track is called Virgins Recently Fucked Sacrifice. Now, I have a lot of questions on that one. Like, namely, are they not virgins then because something happened? Or was the sacrifice like a botched job because you didn't ask the right questions about the people you were sacrificing? Like, are you sure they're virgins? Like, yeah, well, she said there was like one other time that didn't count, but this is the best we got. I suppose that would spoil a sacrifice depending on the deity's demands or whatever. I don't know. I just had a lot of questions about the wording of that song title, but the song overall, absolutely killer, groovy, old school death metal. Again, tons of killer riffs. You also have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which, I mean, it doesn't even contain a sample from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is kind of surprising. But that one, along with The Void and Infected Pharaoh, rapid fire, thrashy, fast paced, lots of blast beats, just killer, fun, aggressive songwriting. I don't understand Infected Pharaoh either. Like, did he have a cold? Or, like, did he stub his toe and not take care of it? I don't know. All I know is I enjoyed this. Like, this is just good, riffy, old school fun with a couple of wrinkles in it to kind of keep you guessing. Like, Hypatia's Heresy actually has a big slam breakdown on it, which feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere, but it's really well done, and it kind of fits with just this kind of fun album. They clearly don't take themselves so seriously in terms of their themes, and I kind of like that. Like, it's a little bit loose and lighthearted at times, but musically very tight, very on point with the just flat out 90s style death metal riffs, and yeah, I dig it. So yeah, if you're a fan of bands like Deicide, Vader, God, I would say like even like a little bit of Decapitated here and there too. Check this out. Pretty solid album. Weird song titles. I don't quite get the context, but I don't really care. Like, good tunes are good tunes. Perishing, Lutum. This is the first demo from this Costa Rican Death Doom act. Features current and former members of Astroferus and Bloodsoaked Necrovoid, and this thing is just positively disgusting old school Death Doom. Very cavernous, very slow, very just drenched in murk and filth. Basically, this demo sounds like it just crawled out of its own grave. The production here, I think, is awesome. It is cavernous, it is drenched in reverb, both vocally and kind of across the board on everything. Like, it just has this dense, cavernous sound. slow plodding riffs, but you do have sections of blast beats and D beats that come in. The songs aren't like super long, like most of them are in the 5 to 6 minute range. The closing song is a little bit over 7 minutes, but they don't like overstay their welcome. They don't drone on parts too long to the point where it becomes too monotonous. Existential Rift in particular, there's a good kind of give and take between blasty sections and just slow, punishing, just slimy breakdowns. And the breakdowns on here will just make your lip curl at how gross they are. Like, think bands like Autopsy, Anatomia, Coffins, stuff like that. Like, this album, the whole atmosphere and vibe of it feels like you're just drowning in wet concrete while the devil laughs at you. That probably sounds like bliss to giant Death Doom fans, but to anyone else, probably a little weird. But while like the whole tone and vibe and the atmosphere of this, definitely just kind of like sets this up to already kind of win for me, it's the dynamics. Like, these guys are really writing some like clever songs in terms of their transitions. And again, it keeps this whole demo interesting. I love every track on here. And honestly, this also could go on a year-end list because I always do one for demos, splits, and EPs. And this is just flat out just perfect cavernous Death Doom. There really isn't anything I don't like on here. This is just executed so damn well. And again, for a demo, this production on here sounds fantastic. So yeah, if you're a big fan of, honestly, Blood-Soaked Necrovoid, though I think like a little bit more riff-oriented, but definitely Anatomia, Autopsy, and Coffins. If you love those three bands in particular, you are probably really going to like this, so check it out. Punebre, or Punebre. I'm really not sure how to say that word. I'm going to take a stab at the album title, Ang Nasa Dako Paroon. This is the debut album from this Filipino-based death metal act. I, again, saw it in a distro. I checked it out. I was like, man, this sounds very familiar because this is kind of like some straightforward, like old school HM2 stuff, but with some like fun kind of like punky twists along the way. I don't know. First thing that kind of caught me off guard was this was the album art that they showed in the distro, and then when I got it, it came with this slipcover over it, which I don't quite get. Like, I love this kind of like weird retro-ish comic book art here. Like, it looks like an old Vault of Horror comic, but just with like a Catholic spin on it, I guess. Like, that looks like Mother Mary, whatever her name is, just holding on to a little Cthulhu baby. It's strange and interesting, and I dig it. And then when I saw this, I was like, why is that on there other than to show off their absolutely wretched logo? But either way, yeah, this one, it kind of just sounds like old school Swedish death metal, but like there's elements of like crust punk all over here. Like, this is just like DB driven as hell. Most of the songs are short, explosive, lots of crust punk undertones, like Holy Maua, Belit, Overdrive, and Shaken and Rattled. There's at least a good mix of songs that are in English, because the ones that aren't, I'm probably going to struggle with. But despite being like more crust punk oriented, there's lots of groovy breakdowns. I really like the bass tone on here. Like, the bass tone sounds especially like grimy, and it just kind of fits in here, especially when they isolate it down. Like, there's some moments where they kind of just do like drum and bass grooves to kind of lead in the shorter songs and then explode. And I don't know, it kind of just sets like a fun tone for the songs. I like the vocals in particular. Like, this dude kind of sounds a little bit like LG. It's fast paced, but it's not like blast heavy. Like, there's only a few songs in here that really kind of like, get like particularly blasty for a bit, but they're generally kind of like short fits of it. And this whole album runs about like 20 minutes, but honestly, it's kind of fun throughout the entire thing. Like, for example, the Ghost of Pepsi Paloma. Now, I didn't necessarily expect it to be like Pepsi. I figured like, all right, well, maybe Pepsi means something different in, the Philippines. Like, the band's name is actually translated to dirge, so there might have been like a double meaning there. No, it actually features an ice cold Pepsi being cracked in the beginning. And, well, it kind of adds like some fun levity to this. The atmosphere ranges from like, more menacing and haunting to like a little bit more tongue-in-cheek. Like, this is kind of like going from like Evil Dead 1 to Evil Dead 2 in the span of like a 20-minute album, I guess, because it goes from like, yeah, we're trying to be spooky and sinister to like, let's just kind of have some fun with it. Yeah, overall, I dug this. I mean, it is HM2 death metal, so there's a good chance I would, but I do like the punky sort of vibe to it, and the fact that it is a little bit like kind of silly and over the top at points. Musically, I think it's just awesome. And again, it's a fun ride throughout the very short ride of this album. If you're a big fan of Entombed, Dismember, Disrupt, I would even say like a little bit of like Toxic Holocaust, albeit like more death metal centric too. Check this out. This is a damn good listen. Tomb Portal, Enthanatogen. I think that's how you say that. This is the debut full length from this Hungarian death metal act, part of the Bone Chapel Collective, which I only knew one of the bands mentioned in that, which was OS, just OS. I actually have one of their albums. And the other two bands that I saw mentioned, Holt, no relation to Gary, and Zerkalet, I'm just flat out not familiar with, but if they sound anything like this and OS, I'm pretty interested. This is just some flat out nasty, very Morbid Angel inspired death metal, very cavernous, very much like early Tomb Mold, honestly. Like maybe not as like technically flashy. Like there's a lot of intricate riffs on here, but in terms of like the drum work, it is a little bit more like kind of based on like droning blast beats. Like you do have like good sections of double time, but a lot of this is all about like tremolo harmonies and conjuring up like an absolutely sinister atmosphere. Actually, maybe a better comparison would be like Fossilization. Fossilization's known for like their just absolutely gigantic atmosphere. Oh my god, that band's amazing live. Anyway, these songs are just dark and haunting. I do like it when they kind of like get more into the groove, because I do think this does lay on the blast like a little bit much at times, to the point where it becomes kind of like static and a little too just drawn out in certain sections. But the song Stillborn of the Void, I really think is a standout. It's a little bit longer than the other tracks, and there's a little bit more in the way of dynamics going on, like some cool atmospheric breaks in there, a little bit more groove in spots, and it kind of just does everything the rest of this album does insanely well in one song. You get some fun D-beats on Catacombs of the Subconscious and interdimensional Kegurgitation. I'm not entirely sure I said that right. I don't even know if that's a real word. Anyway, huge, lurching, menacing riffs. I love it when, you know, just a filthy tone decides to kind of bend a riff. It just instantly makes your lip curl and go, my god, that is gross. And it's a great lead-in to the inevitable explosion of blast beats and just insane dark tremolos on here. This is really good. I only checked out like a little bit of a track and was like, you know what, that kind of sounds up my alley. I'm willing to risk it. And overall, I dig this. And apparently I need to check out the rest of the bands in the Bone Chapel Collective, which I think that's a really cool name for a club group thing. I don't know what they are. If you're a big fan of Incantation, Fossilization especially, like this reminds me a lot of that band, Tomb Mold, stuff like that, definitely check this out. Solid listen. Vultures, Divine Retribution Unleashed. This is the debut EP from this Indonesian death metal act. Indonesia has become like kind of like a hotbed of a lot of, you know, metal activity, both in like, you know, war metal and brutal death metal, black metal. Like there's just a ton of stuff going on there. And honestly, I don't own much in the way of Indonesian metal. So I feel like I'm kind of overdue in terms of like, you know, finding some cool Indonesian metal. And this is some pretty nasty old school death metal. Kind of similar to the last one I went over in the sense that it is very atmospheric, reverby. It's just ferociously old school. The production on it is definitely a bit raw. And while the drums are a tad muffled on this album, I like the overall sound of it. It is just cavernous and rotten. It's good atmospheric tropes, like the way it leads in with an ode to death and destruction. There's a bit of like a gothic overtone, and then it kind of just shifts into like just disgusting Morbid Angel and Incantation riffs. Honestly, a lot of this reminded me of Mortiferum. The atmosphere is very ominous, and while this band definitely lays a bit on the tremolos and tremolo harmonies, they are effective. They're creepy and haunting, kind of similar to the way Fossilization does their thing, which that's 2 times I've referenced that band in this one. You do get some like blastier, more aggressive songs like Reign of Swords and Land of Gathering. They're a little bit more on the aggressive side. They kind of like pull back in the atmosphere a bit and just deliver some bone-crunching riffs and some solid grooves. It's kind of like listening to like a really cavernous version of Bolt Thrower at times, which I'm totally down for as well. Land of Gathering is kind of a standout for me because while I like its overall more aggressive tone, there is an absolutely disgusting Death Doom breakdown where it just slows down to a crawl and kind of lets all of that atmosphere drone out a bit before bookending it with like some just, again, hyper-aggressive blast beats. Well, really nothing on here is like reinventing the wheel by any stretch. It is all really well executed, and I like their songwriting dynamics that keep the songs interesting, even though they do kind of drone on at times. That atmosphere kind of just consumes you, and again, I really just dig the riff work on here. I will say it feels more like a demo than like an EP, but I think that has more to do with just the raw production on here. Overall, this is absolutely killer, and again, kind of like another blind buy. And yeah, I definitely need to look into more Indonesian death metal, because if there's any other bands out there that sound like this, I'm totally down. If you're a big fan, again, of Incantation, Bull Thrower, Mortiferum, God, like, just think like kind of groovy, mid-tempo death metal with, you know, good blasty sections. And if you love like just tremolo harmonies in general, check this out. This thing's just absolutely filthy. Zimmer's Hole, Bound by Fire. This is the debut album from this Vancouver death thrash comedy act. I'm a huge fan of their third album, While You Were Shouting at the Devil. I love pretty much every second of that. It's just riffy and fun and gloriously stupid, and I love it. It's pretty much Strapping Young Lad with just, you know, a different frontman, one Chris Valago, also known as the Heathen, and his absolutely insane vocal range. Now, that last album featured pretty much everyone but Devin Townsend on it. He might have been involved in some facet, I don't know. But Gene Hoglan, Byron Stroud, and Jed Simon. This one actually features a different drummer, Stephen Wheeler, which I really don't know much about. And I based getting this off of my love of that third album. And maybe I should have listened to a couple of tracks of this a little bit more, because this is just sort of silly and goofy, and I feel like it's more based on skits and comedy than it is actual music at times. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of like killer riffs and like interesting songs in here, but for the most part, everything on here is just gloriously stupid. Lots of silly transitions and goofy skits, and probably more adult film samples on here than there are on like Rob Zombie's entire back catalog. And there's also like more almost kind of like grindcore-esque songs, like, oh man, we're gonna read some of these song titles. Blister, that one's tame. Pork Rind Toes, gross. Two-Headed Anal Baby, there's some interesting samples in that one for damn sure. And Bread, all these songs, very short, very blasty, very grindy, very stupid. But that's, I feel like, the intention, and if it wasn't, no, it was. There's no other possible scenario where any of this was remotely taken that seriously. And the Heathen's vocals, the dude has an impressive range, like more so impressive on the last album, but here, I mean, alternating between death growls and screams and different voices for different skits and some actually really nice singing. You can tell they're all talented musicians in here, but they're just fucking around and making dumb music. But admittedly, it's kind of entertaining. Like, you know, there's some like bungle-ish charm to it, and there's almost some Bloodhound Gang-esque charm to it, albeit like musically a bit different. This was not what I was expecting. I was expecting definitely something more along the lines of the third album, but I didn't get that necessarily. So like musically, it's okay. Like it's got its moments. Comedy-wise, yeah, no, put it on at a party. See what people think. It's more 90s risque humor, so I'm sure it'll piss off someone. I don't know, could be a lot of fun. Try it as a social experiment of sorts. But as an album, it's just kind of okay. I strongly recommend When You Were Shouting at the Devil, like, just check that one out. That is so riffy and fun, and it's still silly, but it's definitely more focused on the music. This just feels like a haphazard collection of just dumb fits of humor and rage. I don't know, it's fun in its own right, but it's not the one that I'm going to reach for in terms of like their albums. Oh yeah, this is a reissued version, came out in 2018, I believe, and yeah, it's got some fun pictures of the band, and I'm not going to remove the CD because underneath that, I believe, is actually Zimmer's hole. And I don't want to get demonetized for showing off a picture of someone's balloon knot from 1997. Anyway, check this out. It's kind of fun in its own right, but I mean, unless you're in the mood for something really, really, really silly, it might not be your bag. But still, check it out. And finally, we have Peeling Flesh, the G Code. This is the debut album from this Oklahoma-based brutal death metal / slam act. Admittedly, I was kind of intrigued by the album cover, and I'd heard some people talking about this band in the comments section. I figured, why not? I'll just check it out. And, well, it's interesting. First off, production here is pretty damn solid. In fact, there isn't an annoying pingy snare in here to drive me nuts at all. The guitar's got a good chunky heft to them. The brutal vocals sound like a bear gargling soup. It's brutal as hell. It'll get people moving. I think that's kind of the goal of most slam and brutal death. Like, they want people to just beat the shit out of each other in the pit. But the rest of it, I'm not really much of a fan. This definitely blends in a lot of like hip hop elements. There's rapped vocals to go with or counter the brutal gurgling on here. And I don't know, for me, like, it just never really settles in. That and the riffs get really sterile because it's just a lot of like open chord syncopated chugging with not a tremendous amount of variety. Skin Blunt, Interlude Part 2. Wow, I actually like an interlude. That one actually has some like really interesting like melodies and such. Like, there's some more atmosphere. It feels like a little bit creepy and haunting, and then it just kind of hits stupid gear and kind of loses me and goes back to what this album kind of does for the most part, which is just chug it up, groove, and then space in like weird samples. And I don't know, like, this is just an odd listen. Like, I will say that there are some fun samples on here. There's a TMNT sample in here, and that N doesn't stand for ninja. It stands for what the skit would be if you looked it up on YouTube. And I remember watching the hell out of those videos for years. In fact, their X-Men stuff was also pretty badass. But kind of like that YouTube video, or series of videos rather, this whole thing kind of feels like satirical, like it's a parody, like they're kind of just making fun of slam, and, you know, rather than like doing something to like really kind of like open up the style a bit, they're just kind of dicking around. Like, most of these songs are really short, like very few of them kind of past that 3-minute threshold, and within that short time in all these songs, they really aren't doing much other than kind of repeating the same tropes and then peppering in samples or like a rapped verse or two. And sometimes it just doesn't flat out work. Like Creeping Out the Cut, one of the last tracks in there, good solid groove to it. Like, you know, it's syncopated, it's heavy, but it just became kind of like a monotonous song. Plus they kind of lay on that refrain, Creeping Out the Cut, a lot towards the end, to the point where I started thinking they were saying, take it up the butt. I'm not totally ruling it out. Like, there's a lot of humor on here. Who knows, they might have like peppered in 1 or 2 lines like that just to see if people caught it. Maybe it was carryover from all the adult film samples on Zimmer's Hole, because I listened to that right before I listened to this. So, I don't know. But what I do know is I'm not really a big fan of this. Like, it's just kind of, you know, a little boring, and it really doesn't do much in the way of like riffs or grooves. Like, it just kind of does the basic thing and tries to sprinkle in, you know, some weird atmosphere and different elements on top of it, and it's just really not that interesting of an album. Still though, like with any of this stuff, even if I don't like it, I still urge you to check it out, form your own opinions. Who knows, you might really dig this. I can definitely see, you know, some people getting into this, probably people younger than me. I don't know, maybe I'm too much of an old fuck for this, but I gave it a whirl. It did have some moments on it, but overall, just really not my thing. But still, check it out. Who knows? Could be your favorite album. I don't know. I kind of doubt that, but it could be. So yeah, just check it out. And believe it or not, that is it for this one. This one is relatively short in comparison to the more recent ones. Still, I am working on the next one already, which I think will also be a little bit shorter, maybe. I don't know. We'll see when we get there. But yeah, there's tons of collection updates stuff coming, but I am getting closer to like getting towards something else because I'm kind of catching up to the current pile that's in the room. Either way, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We now offer memberships. They are only 99 cents. And the only perk that we are offering currently is a members only live stream, which we will probably do sometime in November, because October is insanely busy with releases, and we definitely want to like make sure we have time to like really give you guys a cool live stream. We also offer a booger troll emoji, which eventually I am going to put some other stupid stuff in there. Believe it or not, I have a collection of other booger troll pictures, which is not a brag in any way. It's just a thing I have in my computer. But yeah, this is the new way to support the channel directly. We are eventually going to move away from Patreon, and this is also to kind of help us pay for StreamYard, which is raising their prices, but I believe they are adding a lot more stuff, and even the video quality has gotten better. So I guess I can't fault them, but I still feel like I can, because it's kind of a big price hike. Anyway, if you would like to join, there's a join button down below. There's also a link to our store, thrallsmetal.com. We still have our t-shirts and hats, and if you were interested in any of those, just click that link down below as well. And of course, thank you guys so much for all of the support, all the likes, shares, comments, everything. This whole thing has been amazing, and I know I gush about this every time. Like, I thank the living hell to you every time, but I mean it every time. Without you guys, this channel might still be, a bit of fun just in terms of an outlet, but the interaction with the fans out there, that really makes it special. So one more big thank you from me, and we will catch you later.